Hey, howdy, hey, folks. It's Mrs. Johnson. Again, in a fun new location that is not my car. Um, so, with puppies here, so do you, I do apologize for the noise if they become noisy. Um, but we're doing our first formal lesson today in food production pipelines. And I chose to do this one first because it gives us a very brief, basic overview into what kind of steps go into planting, growing, harvesting different kinds of things in the agricultural world, particularly for those of us that don't haven't really seen a farm, haven't really seen cows being grown, and don't really have a whole lot of experience in like actually getting things to grow. I will preface with the fact that when you do go see a real life farm, when you do go see a real life distrib distribution factory or nut processing factory, you will see a bunch of these steps happen all at the same time. Um, and these steps are more so if you follow one item through its life, you will see these steps happen in mostly linear order that I've put them in. So, it can be a little overwhelming if you walk in and go, "Where's the pipeline?" Pipeline's happening in all different stages throughout whatever the heck is happening on said farm or said location. So we'll jump into it. I've, through my brain thinking and trying to conceptualize this, I've broken agricultural production pipelines into three types: plants, animals, and post-harvest. Harvest. Now, post-harvest is a really popular production pipeline to talk about in agriculture. Um, you can find lots and lots of resources for it. Um, and you don't necessarily talk about the stuff that comes before harvest has a production pipeline, but it is. So, and it is different between plants and animals. There's different things happen differently. So, we'll talk about them separately. Um, as I said, do note that there's niche differences between farm site to farm site. But for the most part, everything follows these steps. So for plants, uh, production pipeline that I've kind of gathered, uh, it is by no means 100% accurate to every farm, but for the most part, you follow all these steps. You'll start with planning your production all the way to harvest, and sometimes a little bit of a post-harvest you'll plan before you even start growing things. And then you'll plant your plants and you'll wait for germination and you'll make sure that germination goes well and you'll adjust accordingly if it doesn't. And then you'll cultivate things. Now, cultivation in this sense of the word is kind of a funny sense, funny definition, but I was thinking along the lines of if you transplant plants from the greenhouse to outside, or if you're thinning your carrots once they germinate, um, some of those things that happen very early on after you've reached germination is cultivating in this pipeline. Things that you have to do shortly after germination in order to have a successful harvest. And then you go into just growing things and making sure it's taken care of and making sure there's not weed competition or pests or things like that. And sometimes those two steps sometimes the growing season is so short that those two steps happen all at the same time. Sometimes they're spread out. And then you harvest. And then you're like, yay, I did it. I did it. I grew food. And so here's some examples. For plants, there's a couple. We harvest different things of plants, and we'll talk about that at some point. But you can harvest the leaf parts, you can harvest the root parts, you can harvest flower parts, the fruit parts. And so that whole pipeline of growth kind of changes based on what you want out of the plant. So this top one, if you look, right, we start as a seed, starts to kick out that first root, and then it kicks out that first leaf, which I believe is called petiole. Uh, you can correct me if I'm wrong. And then it's growing, and maybe you're going through at this point and thinning it because it's little and tiny, and you're trying to make it stay alive. And then you're like, okay, cool. You're big enough now that you should stay alive as long as I water you and make sure you don't get swamped by weeds or pests. And then, right, it gets big enough and you're like, oh, yeah, I can harvest, right? And in this case, there's no fruit on it. There's no flowers on it. So you're either taking the stem, the leaves, or the roots. And you're like, okay, cool, this is done. Now this bottom photo goes through the same steps. You've planted the seed. You've kicked out that first leaf. You've germinated, and then you're growing. And I'm babying you because you're a little tiny here. And then you're a little bigger, and I'm like, okay, cool, yay. And then you start flowering, and I'm like, cool, this is good for me. And then in this case, it's a tomato plant. Um, and so then you harvest tomatoes. And in either one of these stages, um, because it's tomato, you harvest the fruit. But it just takes a little while longer when you're harvesting seeds or fruit or flowers because plants have to reach maturity, and then they have to reach sexual maturity, and then they have to have the right conditions in order to reproduce. So it takes a little while. Then we jump into animal production pipelines, right? And you'll see that a lot of this is the same thing as the plant production one. You spend a lot of time planning when you first start, and then you breed, and you go through pregnancy or gestation, and you're making sure all that works out. And then you're raising things. Now, raising, again, is different than growing. When they're little tiny, with almost any animal that we grow commercially, particularly the big ones like pigs, cows, goats, sheep. Poultry is a little different. It's a little funky. But for the most part, you spend their early adult or early life making sure, one, they don't die, and two, mom is taking care of them, and that you're taking care of mom. And then you go through and go, okay, cool, stop relying on mom. That's called weaning. Um, like you don't need mom anymore. Come on. Like you can be a young little pig by yourself. Um, you don't need mom. Here's some food, here's some water, and then you take care of them. And then you get into the growing stage where you're just kind of taking care of them, and you're like, okay, gain some weight, get bigger, get ready to like do whatever it is I want you to do. And then in the livestock world, we do this thing called finishing, which is the last couple months up to a year. Most people don't finish for a year. It's like 6 months, maybe at that. I think it's 6 months for cows, 6 months to a year on cows, which are like some of our biggest livestock in the US. And that's when you're like really pushing these animals to either gain weight or get prepared to produce milk or eggs. And you're like, here's extra protein, here's extra water. I'm going to walk you a lot, get you well muscle developed. Like, you're going to be like, come on, this is Crunch Time. Like, you've got to make weight, you've got to do this, like, you've got to be well rounded. And so you spend a lot of time like making sure these animals are good enough to do whatever job they're supposed to when you start harvesting. And again, we have some examples. This top one, I actually picked animal product examples rather than meat product examples, meat animal. So this first one is cattle. So, right, you have a newborn, which is like itty bitty. This is the raising part, right, in this dark green. You have a newborn, you have a pre-weaned calf, and then you transition them off the milk. And then once they're fully transitioned, you're like, okay, cool. You're golden. You're like this 3-month old, maybe a year and a half, depending on what farm you're going to. And you're now considered a heifer or steer. And depending on which way you go, you eat, or depending on what you're using these heifers and steers for, they're either going to be put into breeding and follow the cycle of getting bred, getting milked, raising calves, right? Or once they hit about 2 years, 2.5 years. So anywhere between a year and a half and 2.5, really, depending on who you are, you'll eat that steer or that heifer. Um, and then on the bottom, we see some chickens, and that follows the same spiel, right? You're a little tiny baby chicken, you get a little bigger, and a little bigger. And when they're this little, they're like really susceptible to diseases and getting crushed. And so you're like, please don't die. Even if you have mom, you might die if I don't freaking baby you. So please don't. Um, and then, you're kind of getting older and you're like, okay, cool. Like 12, 18 weeks, 20 weeks, you're like, cool. You're pretty much set. You're pretty much golden. And meat chickens are usually taken, I think, between 15 and 25 weeks, depending on the breed and things. Sometimes as early as 12 because we've bred things to grow really fast in the US. Don't quote me on that. That's numbers from like forever ago that I'm trying to remember. But once they've fully matured, uh, this says about 22, 23 weeks, or physical maturity at 30 weeks for this specific type of chicken. Um, Onset of sexual maturity happens at 15 weeks. And so you're probably going to see egg production probably between, this says here, ovary reproductive tract, probably about 25, 30 weeks if you're looking to get eggs. Now, we're going to talk what exactly changes plant and animal production pipelines. One, your farm size. We've talked a little bit about that. Your size and resources and herd size, acreage size, all those things change what that production looks like specifically. And it's a little broad, but we'll jump into examples in plenty more videos. This is just a broad overview. What also changes that production pipeline is markets. So if you are in the business of growing pretty show cows for 4-H and FFA, and then 4-H and FFA does not happen in your county anymore, that's an economic demand change and a price change. So you would either pivot your business to something else, you would close the business, or you would move along with your customers. You also have legalities that change your plant production pipelines. So rules and regulations from the government, from the company that you produce for new or different certifications that you might have or want to have, like organic produce or like fair trade produce. Some of you folks might be sticklers on eating just organic food or just fair trade cocoa or fair trade sugar. But there's other rules like how much pesticide can you use? How much growth hormone can you use? How many cows can you keep in a certain amount of area to be safe? And all of those things can be changed and adjusted. And ultimately, it changes the way that production pipeline works for you and your farm site and all sorts of things. So we'll jump into post-harvest pipelines, right? The last two pipelines we we hit harvest and that was dead. Because then you jump into the post-harvest pipeline. This is the one that I said has a lot of information around it. And this one, very much so, is chaotic and everything happens all at the same time. And um, there's lots of hands involved because grocery stores exist, local, like buying from local farms exists. There's all sorts of ways to gather and acquire food in the post-harvest pipeline now that it's been grown and harvested and it's ready to eat or use. So you start with harvesting, and then typically you transport it out of the field, right? You harvest it either in the field or in the place where you butcher animals, and then you transport it to a safe place to be processed to some degree. So you move it around, and processing could be as simple as making sure it's clean, and then, or it could be putting it in a freezer. So the body heat can be expelled from the now dead carcass. Um, or, it could be washing things to make sure that it's clean. Could be making pasteurizing milk and making it safe to eat. And then you go into packing, which is like putting it in nice, cute little containers. Um, and part of processing is like cutting meat up into steaks, making ground beef, making ground pork, making bacon. And then you pack it nice, neat packages. And then you store it and transport it to wherever you're going to sell it and store it until you're ready to sell it. And then you market it. Most of the time, a lot of marketing comes from putting it out on the shelves at the grocery stores and being like, here, look, this product is available. But small farmers actually spend a lot of time marketing their product before it's harvested. And so, right, if you buy a whole steer from a local farmer, you could call that farmer up or that rancher up at any given point in time throughout the year and be like, hey, what's your prices on beef right now? And he give you the whole sales pitch and be like, so and so, blah, 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 blah. Whereas in bigger farms, it happens differently. Oftentimes they have good trade relations, they have a consistent source of who's buying what, and then they sell it independently of the farm. And some examples of this. Cocoa beans, coffee beans. We'll start with cocoa beans, right? So you harvest it. You harvest those cocoa beans, you sort them, probably according to size or grade. And then you let them ripen, and then you break them open, and then you ferment them, and then you dry them, and then you store them. So all this stuff before storage is processing. And for each step, they have to be transported, they have to be packed to some degree, right? In fermentation, you can see that it's packed into these boxes. Drying, you can see that they're also packed into like flat plates, probably like flat, big baking sheets, essentially, probably. And then storage, they're packaged into these probably 50-pound bags to be sold to companies that make things with cocoa beans. And the same kind of thing happens for coffee, right? That farmer, coffee farm, produces it, and then they sell it, right? They're like, here you go, have it. And they sell it in bulk. This is not how all coffee is sold, but this is big scale coffee selling. So bulk sourcing, right? So co-ops, farmer co-ops selling all their products all together and being like, here's 1,000 pounds of coffee, take it, give us a good price on it. And then it goes to processing plant, which sorts and grades it and ensures that it's a good product. And farm-wise data storage, right? A lot of processing plants send the data that comes out of that product back to the farmers to be like, hey, here's the update. In our contract, we said that we would buy it for $5 a pound. It's actually better quality than we thought, so we're going to give you $7 a pound. Or sometimes it happens where a processing plant might be like, oh, hey, like your product's really good, but there wasn't a lot of it because you left a lot of sticks and stuff in it. We're going to have to charge you $1 a pound on that original $5 price. So you actually get 4, right? And now that the processing plant has it, they source it to a company that source it to a company that's going to make stuff with it. And, then they package that, do all the things, and then they export it either to a retailer or a wholesaler. And those are retailers, wholesalers, or the people that stock grocery stores. They are either the grocery stores themselves or the people that stock grocery stores. And then gets into the grocery store and you buy it as a consumer. Now, so there's that. What exactly changes post-harvest production? Well, your product variety changes. How quick, how fast, how long you can hold a product, perishability, storability, your final product type. So how much processing and packaging are you doing? Are you selling tomatoes that just came out of the garden? Or are you making tomato sauce out of it? Storage availability. Right? If I'm a if I'm a farmer growing on 5 acres, I probably don't have access to a refrigerated warehouse to store literally everything that I could ever imagine growing, because it's just not economically feasible. But I might have economically feasible because I probably don't have enough to even reach the minimums to get into that warehouse. But I have other things like my freezer at home. I have other things like a really good consumer market that buys it really fresh, so I don't have to store it long. Now, if you have comments, questions, concerns, please drop them in the comments. I will preface right now that I stole all of these photos off the internet. Every single one of them stolen off the internet. No, I'm giving credit where credit is due right now. And if I present anything, you can safely assume that I stole the photos. Unless they're like photos that have me in them, and then me or my friends took them. So I don't take any credit for the photos. But if you have comments, questions, concerns about production pipelines, please let me know. Thank you. Have a great day. Have a lovely day. I hope we're learning something together. Have a great day.